Roman 1 Carlyle's Life of Sterling by George Eliot. As soon as the closing of the Great Exhibition afforded a reasonable hope that there would once more be a reading public, the Life of Sterling appeared. A new work by Carlyle must always be among the literary births eagerly chronicled by the journals, and greeted by the public. In a book of such parentage, we care less about the subject than about its treatment, just as we think the portrait of a lord worth studying if it come from the pencil of a Van Dyck. The Life of John Sterling, however, has intrinsic interest even if it be viewed simply as the struggle of a restless aspiring soul yearning to leave a distinct impress of itself on the spiritual development of humanity, with that fell disease, which with a refinement of torture, heightens the susceptibility and activity of the faculties, while it undermines their creative force. Sterling, moreover, was a man thoroughly in earnest, to whom poetry and philosophy were not merely another form of paper currency, or a ladder to fame, but an end in themselves own of those finer spirits, with whom amid the jar and hubbub of our daily life, the melodies abide of the everlasting chime. But his intellect was active and rapid rather than powerful, and in all his writings we feel the want of a stronger electric current to give that vigor of conception and felicity of expression, by which we distinguish the undefinable something called genius, while his moral nature, though refined and elevated, seems to have been subordinate to his intellectual tendencies and social qualities, and to have had itself little determining influence on his life. His career was less exceptional than his character, a youth marked by delicate health and studious tastes, a short-lived and not very successful share in the management of the Athenaeum, a fever of sympathy with Spanish patriots arrested before it reached a dangerous crisis by an early love affair ending in marriage, a 15 months residence in the West Indies, 8 months of curate's duty at Hurstmonceux, relinquished on the ground of failing health, and through his remaining years, a succession of migrations to the south in search of a friendly climate, with the occasional publication of an article, a tale, or a poem in Blackwood or elsewheres, on the prosaic background of an easy competence, was what made up the outer tissue of Sterling's existence. The impression of his intellectual power on his personal friends seems to have been produced chiefly by the eloquence and brilliancy of his conversation, but the mere reader of his works and letters would augur from them neither the wit nor the curiosa felicitas of epithet and imagery, which would rank him with the men whose sayings are thought worthy of perpetuation in books of table talk. And honor the public, then, since it is content to do without biographies of much more remarkable men, cannot be supposed to have felt any pressing demand even for a single life of Sterling, still less, it might be thought, when so distinguished a writer as Archdeacon Hare had furnished this, could there be any need for another. But in opposition to the majority of Mr. Carlyle's critics, we agree with him that the first life is properly the justification of the second, even among the readers personally unacquainted with Sterling. Those who sympathized with his p. 27 ultimate alienation from the Church, rather than with his transient conformity, were likely to be dissatisfied with the entirely apologetic tone of Hare's life, which indeed is confessedly an incomplete presentation of Sterling's mental course after his opinions diverged from those of his clerical biographer, while those attached friends and Sterling possessed the happy magic that secures many such who knew him best during this latter part of his career, would naturally be pained to have it represented, though only by implication, as a sort of deepening declension ending in a virtual retraction of such friends. Carlyle was the most eminent and perhaps the most highly valued, and as contrasted with Archdeacon Hare of Sterling's literary character and writings, he felt a kind of responsibility that no mistaken idea of his departed friend should remain before the world without correction. Evidently, however, his Life of Sterling was not so much the conscientious discharge of a trust as a labor of love, and to this is owing its strong charm. Carlyle here shows us his sunny side. We no longer see him breathing out threatenings and slaughter as in the latter-day pamphlets, but moving among the charities and amenities of life-loving and beloved a Teufelsdrockh still, but humanized by a Blumen worthy of him. We have often wished that genius would incline itself more frequently to the task of the biographer, that, when some great or good personage dies, instead of the dreary 3 or 5 volumed compilations of letter and diary and detail little to the purpose, which 2/3 of the reading public have not the chance, nor the other third the inclination to read, we could have a real life, setting forth briefly and vividly the man's inward and outward struggles, aims, and achievements, so as to make clear the meaning which his experience has for his fellows. A few such lives, chiefly indeed autobiographies, the world possesses, and they have perhaps been more influential on the formation of character than any other kind of reading. But the conditions required for the perfection of life reading personal intimacy, a loving and poetic nature, which sees the p28 beauty and the depth of familiar things, and the artistic power which seizes characteristic points, and renders them with lifelike effect are seldom found in combination. The Life of Sterling is an instance of this rare conjunction. Its comparatively tame scenes and incidents gather picturesqueness and interest under the rich lights of Carlyle's mind. We are told neither too little nor too much. The facts noted, the letters selected, are all such as serve to give the liveliest conception of what Sterling was, and what he did. And though the book speaks much of other persons, this collateral matter is all a kind of scene painting, and is accessory to the main purpose. The portrait of Coleridge, for example, is precisely adapted to bring before us the intellectual region in which Sterling lived for some time before entering the church. Almost every review has extracted this admirable description, in which genial veneration and compassion struggle with irresistible satire. But the emphasis of quotation cannot be too often given to the following pregnant paragraph. The truth is, I now see Coleridge's talk and speculation was the emblem of himself in it as in him. A ray of heavenly inspiration struggled in a tragically ineffectual degree with the weakness of flesh and blood. He says once he had skirted the howling deserts of infidelity. This was evident enough, but he had not had the courage, in defiance of pain and terror, to press resolutely across said deserts to the new firm lands of faith beyond. He preferred to create logical fata morganas for himself on this hither side, and laboriously solace himself with these. The above-mentioned step of Sterling, his entering the church, is the point on which Carlyle is most decidedly at issue with Archdeacon Hare. The latter holds that had Sterling's health permitted him to remain in the church, he would have escaped those aberrations from orthodoxy, which in the clerical view are to be regarded as the failure and shipwreck of his career, apparently thinking like that friend of Arnold's, who recommended a curacy as the best means of clearing up Trinitarian difficulties, that orders are a sort of spiritual p29 backboard, which by dint of obliging a man to look as if he were straight end, by making him so. According to Carlyle, on the contrary, the real aberration of Sterling was his choice of the clerical profession, which was simply a mistake as to his true vocation. Sterling, he says, was not intrinsically, nor had ever been in the highest or chief degree, a devotional mind. Of course, all excellence in man and worship, as the supreme excellence, was part of the inheritance of this gifted man. But if called to define him, I should say artist, not saint, was the real bent of his being. Again, no man of Sterling's veracity had he clearly consulted his own heart, or had his own heart been capable of clearly responding, and not been bewildered by transient fantasies and theosophic moonshine, could have undertaken this function. His heart would have answered, no, thou canst not. What is incredible to thee thou shalt not at thy soul's peril attempt to believe. Elsewhither for refuge, or die here, go to perdition, if thou must, but not with a lie in thy mouth, by the eternal Maker, no. From the period when Carlyle's own acquaintance with Sterling commenced, the life has a double interest from the glimpses it gives us of the writer as well as of his hero. We are made present at their first introduction to each other, we get a lively idea of their colloquies and walks together. And in this easy way, without any heavy disquisition or narrative, we obtain a clear insight into Sterling's character and mental progress. Above all, we are gladdened with a perception of the affinity that exists between noble souls, in spite of diversity in ideation, what Carlyle calls the logical outcome of the faculties. This Life of Sterling is a touching monument of the capability human nature possesses of the highest love, the love of the good and beautiful in character, which is after all the essence of piety. The style of the work, too, is for the most part at once pure and rich. There are passages of deep pathos, which come upon the reader like a strain of solemn music, and 30 others, which show that aptness of epithet, that masterly power of close delineation, in which perhaps no writer has excelled Carlyle. We have said that we think this second Life of Sterling justified by the first, but were it not so, the book would justify itself.